So, the Young Turks dedicated like a hour-long program to these ghost-faced gangsters that got caught in Atlanta, Georgia. And what I want to point out is, yes, this seems to be a white criminal gang, okay? But what my point is I believe it was racial profiling by the black sheriff, Sheriff Roundtree. I believe he was racially profiling. And I think what's interesting about it is if you look at the majority of criminal gangs in the United States of America, you have, they're mostly made up of Latinos and blacks primarily, but blacks, Latinos, Asians, and blacks from different parts of the world like Haiti and Africa and things like that, Jamaica, the Caribbean, other Caribbean countries, etc. And when I went to school, when I was in school for criminal justice, we had a whole course dedicated to gangs and organized crime. It was a whole part of the course. It was like a sub-course that you had to have to get your degree in criminal justice. And I remember that the textbook that I was doing, it mentioned this thing called satanic stoner gangs, and it was this made up gang thing that was allegedly satanic neo-Nazi skinheads, which seems to have come from their interpretation of things like the werewolf order and other things of that nature. And they seem to turn it into this imaginary concept that was prevalent, allegedly prevalent amongst white youth and blah, blah, but it was completely made up. It doesn't exist. It's a fabrication. And what's funny is if you look at the link in the description that I give to that, it shows that the majority of so-called satanic gangs that are prominent in the prison system, particularly in Los Angeles County, are actually Latino in origin, Latino, as Alexandria Cortez would say. And that the rituals that they're practicing are not actually satanic, but actually Santa. People don't understand this. Many years ago, like when I was an active Satanist, I was very drawn to the concepts of voodoo, the primal concepts of voodoo. Now, voodoo, which is an Afro-Caribbean form of religion that comes from Africa, I was very fond of it. I've read quite a bit on voodoo and hoodoo. Hoodoo is like voodoo without the religion. It's just the magical practice. So I've read quite a bit on this. I've never practiced it because they're very nasty to animals and things like that. So what Santeria is Santeria is predominantly more popular in Afro-Latino areas, and it's a blending of voodoo with Catholicism. Now, voodoo is already blended with Catholicism, but this is blending it with the Carib religions, the religions of the indigenous people of Cuba and the indigenous people of Mexico and the indigenous people of Brazil, etc. So it's a mixture of all these things. And Catholicism is the most prevalent because the saints, it's the most visibly present. And then you have these different herbal practices from the Native Americans and other practices from the African countries in West Africa where the slaves had come from. And, of course, the god of voodoo is Damballa. Damballa is a serpent god. He is the ultimate god in voodoo. And what people, the reason that they call these gangs, quote, satanic is a misunderstanding of voodoo and Santeria and the idea that these are satanic religions, when in fact voodoo and Santeria are actually very Christian. I think there may be some Santeria practitioners that dedicate themselves to the actual Christian devil, but that's not what Satanism is. So keep that in mind. But what I want to get back to is my basic premise here. If you notice the nonsense that these people are spouting on the Young Turks and Sheriff Roundtree. Now, mind you, if they actually crack down on black criminal gangs, which are the most prevalent gangs in the country, you would probably see black-on-black violence in the majority of gun violence, which is perpetrated by black criminals predominantly. You would see that clear up probably overnight if they did this to the black criminal element, the black gang element. You see no mention of black gangs being, no hand-wringing over all of the black gangs that are prevalent in the United States, no hand-wringing over the amount of Latino gangs in the United States, no hand-wringing over the amount of Asian gangs in the United States, no hand-wringing over the amount of what are termed satanic stoner gangs, which are actually Latino gangs and Afro-Caribbean gangs that are committing animal and human sacrifices in the United States. You see no hand-wringing over any of these things, right? But this one-off, oh my goodness, they caught these people and they're white, and we can point the finger and say there's a white gang because we couldn't say that in the past, but now we can. And then this one black dude gets on there and says that the reason that black criminal gangs exist is because these people have no choice. They have to do this for survival. And then he says white people are doing this because they choose this. How does he know these? He said the white people had a choice and they chose to do this, whereas the black people allegedly have no choice. That's why they do it. That's not. See, that's the ignorance of the media right there. That is the ignorance of media personalities and talking heads. Yeah, black people joined together for survival. What about white survival? People don't talk about the high rates of violence against white people. We had to homeschool my ex-girlfriend's son because of the violence perpetrated on him by black classmates. The school did not want to enforce the rules when it came to black people, and his school was pretty high on the black students, and they didn't want to enforce the rules because they didn't want to look racist. Plus, all the administrators were black, so it was a big. And then I'll never forget, the vice principal of the middle school he was at called him a punk because what happened is some kid kicked him in the feet, and he didn't like that, so he said some nasty things to him. And then the vice principal, in front of the mother, my ex-girlfriend and me, called the kid a punk, right? That's from a school administrator, a black school administrator to a white student. Okay? So that's the maturity level of these people. Now, you don't think that white children, now, he didn't join any gangs, and there are, as far as I'm aware, there's no such thing in my area, any white gangs like that. But the thing is, you don't think that white children that grow up in an environment where they're constantly being beaten up, constantly being picked on, constantly being made fun of for studying, constantly being made fun of for being better at scholastic endeavors, constantly being beaten up all the time, constantly being made fun of because they don't wear designer clothes to school, constantly being belittled by the school administration, their teachers, their classmates. You don't think these children would, join together for survival, for camaraderie? You think they have a choice? Do you think they have a choice? They do have a choice. I could have went with the flow when I was younger and started becoming an urbanized white suburban kid, but I didn't, and that resulted in me having to go to schools for the criminally minded. I went to schools for delinquents because instead of bending to the will of these people, I fought back. And that landed me because my parents didn't homeschool me, and they didn't pay for me to go to a private school. And in fact, they turned down my grandfather's offer to pay for me to go to a private Christian academy, so that I could get a proper education. I ended up having to go to schools for juvenile delinquents, where, if anything, I had to resist the nonsense harder. I didn't get an education at all, and that's the result of that. So what I'm saying is, for somebody to ignorantly state that white people have a choice, but black people don't, about whether they join a gang or not. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. And the thing is, as I stated before, there's no mention, as I've mentioned in previous videos, about criminal activity in the gangs. The Young Turks aren't flipping out about all the black and Latino criminal activity in the U.S. military. They're not flipping out about the black and Latino criminal activity in law enforcement agencies. No. But this gang, this ghost-faced gangsta gang that got caught doing naughty things, that's news. But, if this same thing was done, say instead of being an obese black man named Sheriff Roundtree, which is such a suitable name for somebody with a waist almost as big around as they are tall, but say instead of being an obese black man, it was a white man that was the sheriff, and he decided to crack down on all the black gangs in the Atlanta area, because believe me, there's a lot of black gangs in the Atlanta area, okay? And say would that make the news like this? No, it'd just be another gang bust, another drug bust. It's 75 people or 100 people or 6,000 people or however many there would be were arrested, and there might have been some police misconduct and blah, blah, blah. They try and play it off as it being the fault of the police for serving a warrant wrong or something like that. But you don't get any of that with this, do you? No, what you get is you get potential white supremacists. And there's a lot of females in this gang. A lot of females. That's what you get from this. And I think it shows the racial prejudice in law enforcement. I think it shows that this black sheriff was racially profiling these people. And I think more white people need to speak up about that. And that's all. I don't think these people are necessarily innocent. But my point is why are you not cracking down on black criminal gangs to this extent? You're not. And why aren't you? Why aren't you? Period. If the black gangs in Chicago were cracked down on like this, or the black gangs in Philadelphia were cracked down on like this, or the black gangs in Atlanta were cracked down on this like this, you would see black on black crime disappear overnight. Why do you not worry about black on black crime? It's because black lives don't matter to black people, or at least to black lives, to socially upwardly mobile black people, such as the black sheriff obese Roundtree of Atlanta. They don't matter to him, or he'd be cracking down on the people that are doing harm to black people. And it's not the Ghostfaced gangsters.